and I saw things and my face frowned up. And I said, what? Huh? Not surprised, frowned up. Okay. So we all know that voting rights historically in this rotten colony of the United States of America has always been segmented to the most privileged people first. Okay. Uh, Property owning white men first. Non-property owning white men second. White women who got permission slips from their husbands third. Everybody else, distant fourths, fifths, and sixes, right? Just well, fuck it. Well, we had to take care of the white men and the white women, so however else this shit settles itself out towards the latter part of the list. Well, fuck it. We'll just let the shit shake out how it shakes out. So it should come as no surprise to anyone that here in this 21st century, got to stay on brand with the 20th, 19th, and 18th centuries. In the 21st century, white folks are still going out of their way to make sure that niggas do not vote. Okay? Now, it may not be as widespread as it was in centuries past, but make no mistake, it is absolutely still there. And it is there in a lot of states, but today we are focusing on Florida. I just feel such. I know Black people have been in Florida for many generations, and I feel so bad for those Black folks in Florida. I don't know who I feel worse for. Black people. Who you feel worse for? Black people in Florida, Alabama, or Mississippi? Now think about it, because each of them, I'm sure, lovely places in their own respect. In the places where you feel safe in your skin, yes. Oh, but each of them a very distinct flavor and texture of racist hell. I digress. So I want to show you this video, guys. The video's making the rounds today around social media, and let me give. Thankfully, there's not a trigger warning. No, well, at least not for violence, right? No one is beaten. No one is shot in these clips. But what you will see are people, Black folks, legally being kidnapped by agents of the state. And the reason why these Black folks are being arrested has everything to do with the rights that they had been legally restored, but because Ron DeFascist, Governor Ron DeFascist, wants to stoke mass confusion, uncertainty, muddy the waters about what former incarcerated people are legally able to do at the ballot box. These people have, by no fault of their own, found themselves in handcuffs at the whim of the law enforcement agency for what? Trying to vote. So let's take a look at this body cam footage. I believe I'm going to attribute this to the Tampa Bay Times. I believe circulated this first. So check this out and just listen. And even the conduct of the police officers, I can't even be super mad about, because the cops were trying to explain a very stupid fucking law and a reason why these people's freedom was being taken from them in that moment. The police were explaining that in relatively calm terms. And I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of the brothers and sisters who were being arrested for the reasons they were being arrested. And I don't know if I would have been able to be as calm. So let's take a look at this body cam footage of different arrests of Black folks who were formerly incarcerated, but they were arrested for casting votes. Let's take a look.
So apparently, I guess you have a warrant?
For what?
I'm not sure.
For voter stuff, man.
For voters.
It's what it is. I think the agents with FDLE talked to you last week about some voter fraud, voter stuff, when you weren't supposed to be voting, maybe.
I didn't.
So
What are they talking about?
that's
man?
what we're not the case agents, but what you got to do, they have reduced your bond quite a bit. It's 2 felony charges for voter fraud, but they've reduced it to $500 bonds. So it's $1,000 total.
Oh my God, man! What
So, yes, sir. So unfortunately, right now we're gonna have to take you to jail, but you got a bond right away. You don't have to go to first appearance, nothing like that.
A
So
bond? I didn't do it.
Okay, so ma'am, We have a warrant for your arrest.
For what?
For voter fraud.
Good, how are you, sir?
Right?
Oh my God. Hold on.
Wait.
Let me tell my husband.
We're telling him, he's right here.
Right here. So if you can put your hands behind your back, please.
Oh my God.
Do
So,
not move.
ultimately, ma'am, you have a warrant? Okay. The warrant. Listen, hold on, listen. I know you caught off guard, I understand. Right? So you have a warrant, it's for voter fraud, okay? Hear me out. It's an ROR. You know what an ROR is?
Oh my God.
You go in, you get booked, and then they're going to release you from booking.
I misspoke when I said there's not violence in those clips. Being immediately stripped of your freedom for something that you were not even aware was a crime, it technically should not even be a fucking crime. But because Florida and their lawmakers do things to specifically target non white folks, these people get kidnapped off the street. And again, I am even loath to give the police any credit for anything, but I felt the empathy coming from the cops. Now, mind you, it's still fuck them because they still did their fucking job. They still put handcuffs on these people, still ran them the fuck to jail. I mean, just listening to the brother and sister there just be in such disbelief and understanding. I can hear them doing the calculations in their head. Do I have $1,000 to get the fuck out of this bond? ROR released on my own recognizance, God willing, if I don't have a cracker fucking judge. What if the judge is a fucking cracker and wants to issue me a $500 bond, $1,000 bond? Can I put my hands on $500? Does my family have that? Is that going to cut into our monthly living expenses? Probably. And this is exactly as intended. This is exactly what Ron DeSantis has wanted, to target Black voters in this way. To stifle the Black vote is something that has been very high on conservatives' wish list, and they have largely been successful. But I want to put this package up, guys. And this is from Click on Orlando. And again, it's actually a pretty decent investigative piece about the issue of voter fraud in Florida. And we are going to see some white folks be arrested and convicted of voter fraud. But the difference between what these white folks did and what these poor Black people who were just kidnapped by the state off the street in the clip that we just saw is that the white folks knew that they was cheating at the ballot box. The white folks with intention made sure to cast multiple ballots. And they did it with such the confidence of thieving ass, criminal ass white folks. They just knew they wasn't going to get in trouble for the shit. But the gag is only a fraction of them have been held accountable for their intentional voter fraud. Whereas the unintentional, and I refuse to call what these Black voters did fraud, because they were not intending to defraud the system. They had been told that their voting rights had been restored. But Ron DeSantis came about with a scheme that basically made people pay poll taxes. They had to come up with some monetary fine punishment for these people. And for those who were not able to pay off their fines or their poll taxes, and they voted anyway, then according to DeSantis and his new fucking voter integrity bullshit unit, then they decided those people have now recriminalized themselves simply for the act of voting that they were told that they were legally able to do. But let's take a look at these crackers, okay? Because these crackers knew they were not supposed to be voting. And I need you guys to pay attention to the ways in which the white folks were collected. Do you think they were collected by, law enforcement doing their fucking job? No. A citizen, I'm gonna call this person a citizen journalist, because they dug into the public records and did their due diligence in their research. But we're gonna hear this story about a tipster who cross-checked voter rolls, found people that he thought may have been voting fraudulently, and alerted authorities. Did the dumbass authorities figure this shit out on their own? No fucking way. You know why? Because niggas wasn't involved, okay? Niggas was not involved They cannot be bothered to waste a good law enforcement dollars tracking down shit white folks done did. But anyway, some white folks did go down for this. So let's check out this package from Click on Orlando. It's about 4 minutes. So check it out. Check it out. It's good though.
Residents of the Villages arrested for allegedly voting twice in the 2020 election. Authorities first learned about those voter fraud cases from an anonymous tipster.
Tonight, we reveal how that very same tipster alerted state officials to hundreds of other potential voter fraud cases. As News 6 discovered, few have been criminally prosecuted so far. News 6 investigator Mike DeForest breaking some new developments in this story for you tonight. Mike, you've told us about this anonymous tipster before.
Matt, he goes by the pseudonym Totes Legit Votes, as in totally legitimate. Those 3 voters in the Villages were arrested because of information uncovered by Totes Legit. The anonymous tipster has identified many others who may have also illegally voted twice, but more than a year after he began warning the state about it, relatively few have been held accountable. Last year, someone using the pseudonym Totes Legit Votes, who describes himself as a citizen election integrity analyst, was quite busy on his computer. Totes Legit had obtained Florida's voter rolls, which anyone can request, and compared them to voter rolls he got from other states, like this one from New York. By examining the 2 spreadsheets, Totes Legit identified people who may have cast a ballot in Florida while also casting a second ballot in another state. If accurate, that's a potential felony. Totes Legit emailed his findings to Florida's Secretary of State, who oversees elections. By the end of last year, the tipster had identified dozens and dozens of Floridians who may have voted twice in the last general election, 282. But as News 6 has learned, relatively few have been charged with crimes so far. Here in Florida, these 3 residents of the Villages were prosecuted as a result of the tips from Totes Legit. And a few have been prosecuted outside the state, including these voters in Idaho and Rhode Island who allegedly cast ballots there after first voting in Florida. But most of the information uncovered by Totes Legit has not yet resulted in criminal charges.
If evidence is found of a crime, you will be held accountable.
Florida's Secretary of State, Cord Byrd, is not telling us how his office addressed those anonymous tips, but News 6 has uncovered some answers. After Totes Legit emailed tips to the Secretary of State in Tallahassee last year, that office forwarded them to county-level elections officials throughout the state. As News 6 has learned, each supervisor of elections handled the tips differently. When Sumter County Supervisor of Elections Bill Keene received the tips, records show his staff investigated and then sent them to State Attorney Bill Gladson, who later filed felony charges against Joan Halstead, Jay Ketzik, and John Ryder. Halstead and Ketzik have since admitted to the crimes. Ryder is still awaiting trial and has pleaded not guilty. Other election supervisors tell News 6 they also notified their local prosecutors but never received an update. If an election supervisor determined a voter cast their first ballot in Florida legally and then cast a second illegal ballot in another state, the tips were often forwarded to those other states.
There are investigations ongoing into people that have voted in 2 different jurisdictions, and I imagine you are going to see prosecutions on that.
Governor Ron DeSantis recently hinted that the state's newly created election police unit may get involved. Just last week, after News 6 began asking questions, the Secretary of State's office sent election supervisors another batch of tips from Totes Legit, instructing them to review the information and then report back to that new Office of Election Crimes and Security for criminal investigations. Many of the potential double voters identified by Totes Legit are elderly, in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. In some cases, prosecutors say they declined to file criminal charges if the voter appeared to have some memory problems and did not intend to break the law. In at least a few cases, election officials found data errors, meaning no crime occurred. Matt and Lisa.
So, Mike, what does Totes Legit, which is a strange name to say on TV, think about all of this?
To be clear, I've never actually spoken to him by phone. We've only exchanged some emails. But Totes Legit tells me he's not trying to get anyone in trouble. Instead, he says he's just trying to point out that voter fraud does occur more than some may realize, and he does not believe that the government can prevent all of it from happening.
Hey, so about that. Now number one, voter fraud is a very rare thing. I know you guys have seen lots of reports about the scarcity of actual voter fraud, but I tell you, in a lot of the stories regarding voter fraud, the ones who are doing the voter frauding, who is it, guys? Is it? If you said the whites, you would be correct. Yes, the whites are out here voter frauding at a very high level. And that little caveat towards the end about how Florida prosecutors have declined to move forward with prosecutions about voter fraud because some of the alleged perpetrators themselves are elderly, and we know elderly people never commit crimes. We know that, or they had mental health issues. Oh, isn't that so kind of the system to take into consideration people's mental health status or their um I will say ignorance to the law. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny how that empathy and that understanding and that consideration seems to come out? And I'm imagining that most of the people that these Florida prosecutors declined to file charges for voter fraud, I'm going to guess they were all white. I'm going to guess every single fucking one of them was white. And I will be happily corrected if that is found out to be not true. Because there is no sympathy for mentally ill Black people. There's no sympathy for elderly Black people. There's no sympathy for any Black person who mistakenly or deliberately runs afoul of the law in any way, shape, or form. And I'm very encouraged that those residents of the villages went to jail. If memory serves, and you guys know I consume a lot of marijuana, so sometimes my memory do not be serving. But wasn't them motherfuckers bragging about the shit? Wasn't they posting up on their grandkids' TikTok or whatever the fuck, bragging about how they voted for Trump twice, how they voted for this one twice, how they knowingly intended to commit voter fraud? Okay, DeSantis and his prosecutors had no other choice but to run them people down to jail because all of this hemming and hawing and carrying on about voter fraud, nigga, it be your own niggas. To be DeSantis, it is your own niggas out here running that voter fraud. So maybe you need to collect them motherfuckers. Hilarious. Thank you so much, KevZ247. We appreciate your membership, Kev. Thank you so much, Kev. Kev, thank you for your ongoing support. You've been here a while. We appreciate you, Kev, very much. Very much. Oh, but hold on, y'all. Hold on. Will, pop up that Guardian article for me, okay? Now, this is going to become relevant in a second. It's all relevant. But anyway, so the Department of Justice under Joe Biden is aware that Florida Republicans out here for some fuckery. This was reported back in August. Florida Republicans targeted Black voters, Justice Department says in filing. So the Justice Department is trying to come collect a southern state behind targeting Black voters. I'm getting Shelby County v. Holder fucking chills going up and down my spine as we speak. But anyway, let me read this piece. I'm gonna try my best here. Florida Republicans intentionally targeted Black voters when they entered voting restrictions, when they enacted voting restrictions last year. The Department of Justice said in a court filing on Wednesday. Again, this was back from August. The department told a federal appellate court that a lower court that had correctly evaluated claims of racial discrimination when it came to Florida's new law. In March, U.S. District Judge Mark Walker blocked a new restriction on the availability of absentee ballot drop boxes, regulations for third-party voter registration groups, and a ban on providing food and water to those who are standing in line to vote. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit passed the ruling earlier this year while it considers an appeal from Florida officials. So the Justice Department's allegation of racial discrimination is significant because the agency carefully chose when to get involved in a voting dispute, litigations filed by private plaintiffs, and the department's voice carries a significant credibility in court. That's interesting also. After going largely quiet under Donald Trump, the Justice Department's voting section has filed challenges to voting laws in Georgia, Texas, and Arizona, in addition to filing several briefs in other voting disputes. I want you guys to keep in mind the Department of Justice is looking into what the Florida Republicans are doing there to target Black voters. And I want us to take a moment to look back in history, if we could, because this is not going to surprise any of you. But did you know that Florida is the site of America's bloodiest, most deadliest election day violence historically? Now, we've seen election day violence lots of places in this country. And when I say election day violence, I mean when niggas show up to try to vote, because what other reason is there for racists to get rowdy on election day if it wasn't for the Black people trying to flex their constitutional rights, of which I still stand by the fact that we have none, okay? But there is a community in Florida, Central Florida. If I have this mistaken, Floridians, feel free to correct me. Okogie, Florida. You guys know where that is? Okogie, Florida. It's known as the Okogie Massacre, November 2nd, 1920, 102 years ago almost, where Black people showed up to the polls to vote, okay? And what do white folks, violent racists, have to do in order to put uppity Negroes in their place? They have to murder them. Not only do they murder them, but they have to burn their entire town to the ground. They have to send the residents of that town fleeing in the middle of the night for their lives. And then, in typical colonizer fashion, the land, the very valuable land owned by a lot of these Black folks, was seized. Well, fuck seized, robbed, stolen from them, and sold for profit by the white people. Oh, and then they turned the town into a sundown town, and niggas didn't live there for years. I want us to take a look at this. Is going to be just a trailer, just a little teaser about the Okogie massacre that happened in Florida, November of 1920. And I actually watched this documentary today. It's free on YouTube. Boy, I apologize. I can't pronounce anything on today. It's spelled Ocoee and it's pronounced Ocoy. And the story about July Perry and Moses Norman, two Black men. When I say of prominence, I mean these brothers, they had their shit together, right? They had, citrus picking businesses. They would hire other Black people in the community. They owned their homes, they owned their land. This was a successful, certainly by economic definitions, this was a successful Black community. And what has happened in America when Black folks are autonomous and reliant upon themselves and are able to amass just a tiny bit. I can't even say amass wealth, because when have we ever amassed wealth? But the fact that they were landowners and homeowners was far too much for them to have, according to the white folks. So on election day 1920, when Moses Norman and July Perry showed up to vote, they were forcefully sent away, right? But they had some white allies. One white ally by the name of Judge Cheney, who was a Republican. And at this time, the Republicans were in Florida trying to actually get Black people registered to vote. This was before, the big mid-century Dixiecrat revolution, right? This is when I guess Republicans thought themselves to be friends of Negroes, at least politically. So when Moses Norman, when he was turned away from the polls, he went to see his white friend, Judge Cheney. Judge Cheney said, "Nah, bruh, we got our papers together. You didn't pay your poll tax. Go back over there and tell them that you want to vote." And Mr. Norman did just that. And then the violence soon came to the town of Ocoee very soon after that. So let me just be clear here. To this day, historians do not know how many people were murdered in the Ocoee massacre. To this day. In the documentary, they speculate between 3 and 60. Okay. But a lot of what we know about the Ocoee massacre has been passed down via oral tradition, because again, in a typical white supremacist American system, on paper, there is no record that the massacre ever occurred. I think they maybe characterize it as a racial skirmish. In fact, the Ocoa massacre is not taught in Florida schools, not even taught at the fucking high school, at Ocoa High. So said some of the participants in the documentary. They said, we went to the fucking high school. They never even mentioned the shit. Yeah, I bet they didn't. So after the black people were massacred, people fled their homes, fled their lands, as we have seen again on a previous instance in which we delve into racialized American history or racist violence in American history. We have an episode here on this channel about the Wilmington massacre, I believe, of 1898, where again, when niggas got to be too uppity, when they got to have too much accumulation of land, of property, and aspiring for political power, that's when the racist violence really gets turned up big. So, what also happened at Ocoa? Part of the reason that the black people fled is because I believe it was the Orange County sheriff deputized a white mob, right? Funny how law enforcement and the white supremacist violence, these things seem to hold hands and skip to the cross burning together and the lynching together at the same time. Law enforcement and Klansmen holding hands, united as one, as they've always been, right? So the Orange County sheriff deputized the white mob and basically sent, agents of the state down there to murder Negroes. Now, how some of this plays out in modern day Ocoa is that I believe the granddaughter of that deputy is married to the current mayor of Ocoa. And I'm not even sure if he's current. He was the mayor of Ocoa, according to the documentary that I watched. He was the mayor of Ocoa for a very long time, a couple of decades. And he was married to the granddaughter of that sheriff who deputized the Klansmen to go and murder niggers. And at the end of the day, that has been part of the reason why there has been a very slow recognition of this incident, because the people who were present or who have very close ties to those who were catalysts and agents of this massacre, again, because black people wanted to vote, a lot of them are still around. And they don't even want to talk about it. We don't even want to acknowledge it. They don't even want to talk about it. Meanwhile, we have to ban critical race theory because it makes white kids feel bad about themselves. We can't be telling white kids exactly the history of this country and how certain places came to be and why the things are the way they are. No, because that would reveal Grandpa Pop as a fucking racist piece of shit that he still is, was, and forever will be. Really quick before I move on about Ocoa. Ocoa went on to like I said, I watched several stories about this place today, and one of the stories done in recent years by a local news agency, I think it was WESH down there, talked about the value of the land and estimated the current value of Ocoa, where black people used to live, and they went back and checked the census records and the property deeds, etc., and there were a significant amount of black homeowners. That land is worth $10 million, $10 million. And not a single descendant from Ocoa has ever seen a single cent of that. And the deeds of transfer from the properties that black people were on paper as listed as owning, the ways in which the racists went back and revised the record. In some instances, it's actually written on the deed that this land transfer was not made under duress. Now, nigga, if you gotta say that I did not have a gun pointed to my head, chances are you had a gun pointed directly at your head, right? So these people were thieved of this land. They were robbed of this land. This land was stolen. And also about this documentary, there was a couple things there that kind of made me a tiny bit uncomfortable, because it was like the documentary opens in 1850s with one of the first white settlers there who brought some enslaved Africans with him. Make no mention about the indigenous people. They don't even mention in the documentary which indigenous land that Ocoa sat on. So we don't listen, y'all. We can very firmly and clearly and accurately discuss white supremacist violence in America against Black people, and we do not have to erase other people's stories. I know people are like, well, that's our stories about Black people. It's not about Indian people. Well, guess what? Somebody was there before 1850. Okay, where did they go? What happened to them? What was the compensation for those lands? These struggles are all interconnected, and we cannot discuss one without mentioning, at least acknowledging that the other thief of the land had taken place from the indigenous folks who were there before everybody. So there's that. Interestingly enough, one last thing about Ocoa. One last thing about Ocoa. So the Black folks, again, in Ocoa, politically minded about that action, they complained to the Justice Department. That same Justice Department, the same Justice Department that's investigating Florida Republicans for deliberately targeting Black voters for voter restrictions. In 1920, after the Ocoa massacre, Black folks there also petitioned the Department of Justice to investigate the shit. Can y'all come down here and look at this shit? Because this shit is fucked up. The Department of Justice got back to the Black folks and said, hey, you know what? We don't even think y'all rights was infringed upon. We didn't really see anything. Nothing to see here, Johnson. Sprinkle some crack. That's what the Justice Department told the Black folks in 1920 after they had been on the receiving end of white racist violence that burned their town to the ground, murdered an still unknown amount of people, and stole tens of millions of dollars of valuable land from right up under them. So there's that.